thanks so much for checking out Tea and Butty on YouTube. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Hello, and welcome to the Tea and a Butty podcast. I'm Dominic.
And I'm Erica.
Today's episode is going to be about that famous show, Outlander. Again, it's a reprise, people.
It's like Groundhog Day.
It's like Groundhog Day. You might have, but this is an episode with a difference. This is going to be
a twist.
A twist. We're going to talk about the characters of Outlander and how we perceive them and how they're played by their respective actors.
Yeah. The character development.
The character development.
Our opinions of
our
the characters.
opinions. And this is just the main cast and some of the former main cast too. You know, the standout characters. So we're not going to talk about all of them because that would take forever and a day.
Yeah. And you guys, I know we promised in a previous podcast that we were going to try to tone down the Outlander talk.
But we just watched the last episode and we started talking about it and we were like, you know what? We're on lockdown. We're in quarantine, baby. We're in quarantine.
Yeah.
And so you're getting this episode and you're probably sick of it right now. You're probably turning off of... But if you're an Outlander fan, you're not. You want to hear what we've got to say, don't you?
Even if you're not an Outlander fan, if you are into Scotland or Britain or...
Scotland!
The American Revolution or the British...
Where is Scotland?
The British colonization of America, the 1940s, the 1960s, any kind of thing like that, history...
Where is Scotland? Is that in England?
Then you might like this show. So
I think everybody would like this show.
Stay tuned in. Listen to us describe these characters. Hear our opinions of them. And maybe you'll want to look into watching the show yourself. And then if we do another Outlander episode, you'll be in the know.
You'll be in the know. You'll be primed and ready.
Yeah. It's a fun show.
It's a fun show. I mean, when we watched the first episode and we thought, oh, it's a little bit slow. What's going to happen here?
Yeah.
We will give it a couple more episodes and then we'll abandon it if it's taking too long to get to where it's going. Because there's a lot of shows, especially made in the last 10 years or so, that take an age to get to what they're saying.
Well, the Borgias is like that for you, isn't
yes,
it?
the
Borgias.
Really I'm not feeling it, man. I'm not feeling it.
I'm getting into the Borgias.
I like Jeremy Irons. I like, the cast. It's a very well-made show, but it's kind of meandering. And I get that they sometimes have to do that when they've got 24 episodes to tell a story and they want to tell a story in an arc. And I'm kind of like, a story arc is good.
Yeah.
And that started in the late 90s, that let's do story arcs for TV shows, you know.
Wow, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of did, I'm going by Star Trek now, because Star Trek was an episodic television show.
Yeah.
And it was kind of self-contained episodes. Then with Deep Space Nine, they started doing story arcs, I mean, they do two-parters here and there.
I mean, I think that's always been the case for a drama, really.
I suppose, a soap opera. It's like, previously on As the World Turns, previously on Emmerdale, whatever,
Yeah.
But some now, it's taking it to an extent, and there's pacing as well. It's like, it's not telling the story. Outlander's got good pacing, though.
Yeah.
You start to appreciate it as it comes into, its own.
Well, no, I thought it was interesting because last night, Killing Eve, I don't know how many of you guys watch Killing Eve.
Killing Eve, everybody. It's back. Season 3.
Yeah, but Killing Eve came back. And so we watched that. And then we watched Outlander. And I don't know, it was just so... Because I'm a fan of Killing Eve. We like that show.
Yeah, it was great. The first 2 seasons, yeah.
It's a very entertaining, fun show, if you can say something's fun about, with a lot of murder and stuff in it. But
the good villanelle.
Psychopaths. But it's a fun show to watch and everything. But I guess I'm definitely like a period drama type of girl, really. Because watching Killing Eve first and then watching Outlander, I was much more into Outlander last night. I was the story was more interesting. I don't know.
Maybe
I was much more excited about it.
Because we haven't seen Killing Eve for a long time, really. And it's come back now, and it's kind of like, well, Eve was supposed to be dead. This is spoilers.
Yeah.
Was supposed to be dead in the last.
Oh yeah,
show.
if you haven't seen Killing Eve season premiere, then he's about to spoil it for you. So,
but to spoil it for you, she's alive. I think people who've seen the trailer though know she's alive, and they're just like, okay, what is it going to be about? Is it just going to be about Villanelle and all the other characters, or what? And it's kind of more of the same, really. It's more of the same, and it's kind of like, okay,
we get the point.
We get the point with this now. Yeah. With Outlander, it's like it's based on books, and it's kind of like, okay, what's going to happen with this?
You could. Last night I said it's more of the same about Killing Eve, and you said, well, I guess you could say that about Outlander too. And I was like, well, not really. They've always got something kind of different going on Outlander. I mean... Well,
you're invested in the story. With Killing Eve, it's kind of like, oh... Yeah, they kind of had a culmination. What's going to happen now? I mean, I'm saying it's because we're kind of more into Outlander at the moment than we are into Killing Eve.
Maybe.
We've forsaken Killing Eve.
We'll get back into it.
And we might get back into it,
Yeah.
But as going back to what I was saying, Outlander, the first season, first couple of episodes were a little bit, are we going to get into this? It's a little bit, it's a bit slow. But then it really started to pick up. It started to get really interesting. Like the third or fourth episode, and then we were just hooked.
I can't remember. I think I was kind of into it from the first episode.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, you didn't seem like you were, but maybe I was just thinking of that as myself.
Okay, so really quickly, if you haven't heard our previous podcast, Outlander is a show that starts off in the 1940s. The main character, Claire
Randall,
travels back in time
via Craignadoon, the stones of Craignadoon, everybody, in the Highlands of Scotland.
She finds herself back in the 1700s, and so it just kind of is about the people that she meets and relationships that are formed, and then is she going to go back to her time period, or is she going to stay in the 1700s? We don't know. Turns out she goes to the 1700s. She goes back to her time, lives there for a while, and then ends up going back again to the 1700s.
Yeah.
So basically, that's the gist. And last night, they took last week off. So last night came back, and I think that was another thing. I was like excited because, finally it's back.
It's back, yeah, because they took a week off, because for some reason they break during the season, and they leave a week, and they want people to catch up on what's going on in the season so far. Yeah. So we were kind of like, for people who haven't seen season 5 yet and want to watch it and not have any spoilers, turn away now, look away now, stop listening now, go la 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 la, whatever.
There will be spoilers. So let's just start with
major spoilers.
Let's just start talking about the characters, or we're gonna totally run out of time.
Yeah, we're gonna totally run out of time here. But yeah, they broke with the Roger getting hanged. The Ballad of Roger Mack.
That's where it ended previously.
Previously on Outlander.
But let's focus on the character development.
The characters.
Yeah, talking about
We'll start
Roger,
with Claire, because she's the main character.
Yeah.
She's the ultimate main character, no matter what people say. Claire is now, in the books too, I think. Diana Gabaldon will
we also do need to say that, we have not read the books.
We have not read the books.
The series.
So people who've read the books are wondering how this is going to be. In this last episode, apparently a lot of people weren't too happy with who'd read the books. Apparently. We don't know why, because we haven't read them.
Yeah, so just take into consideration that everything we're talking about is coming from our opinions based on
the TV show.
The television portrayal.
The Stars TV show.
Yeah.
We'll start off with Claire Fraser, played by Katrina Balfe, an Irish actress.
Oh, she's gorgeous.
She used to be a model. Yeah, she's gorgeous.
You can tell.
Model figure. Face, hair.
She's got a face,
she's got a face, hair, whatever.
Yeah.
I think, she starts off as this kind of like, she's almost too modern for the 40s.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think they may have done that. I don't know how Diana Gabaldon wrote her in the books, but when we were watching her in the 40s, she was quite a modern woman. But I mean, then again, you think that women had their own opinions in the 40s. They just kept them to themselves because of the whole patriarchal society.
I think she's written as a bit more modern because of the experiences she's had. She's been to war.
She's been to war. She was a combat nurse in the war in the British Army.
Yeah, so she went overseas with the army.
World War II.
Yeah, World War II.
In the thick of it.
She saw a lot.
Saw a lot, did a lot.
Yeah, so I think that that's where they're coming from, rather than just, oh, isn't she relatable because she's quite modern for a 1940s
Yeah, but
life.
I'm talking about, like, attitudes to, like, sex and, you know, and stuff
yeah, but
like
I mean,
that,
that's going to...
But
that's going to have something to do with it.
Maybe.
It's...
I mean, she was married before she went into one. Her husband was an army. He was in the army too, but I think he was like he was a major maybe or something.
I don't know.
He was an historian, Frank, played by Tobias Menzies. We'll talk about him later on because he's a former character now.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was married to this Frank, and she was kind of modern, you know, this is where it all starts. He took her on a holiday up to Inverness to get away from it all, you know.
Yeah.
1946, the war's over, everybody's recovering.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like a therapeutic holiday of sorts, you know.
Yeah.
And she wasn't really into it because she was kind of like, oh, it's a bit boring, this story.
I don't know.
I kind of know
think
the history, but, you know, I enjoy being up here, you know.
I think it was just...
It's very beautiful.
It was more about them reconnecting as a
couple. Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So she was just like, you know, whatever. I just want to be with my husband, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that you mentioned her attitude towards sex, because she's very sexual, obviously.
Oh, yes. I mean,
it's like
something carried over from the books, I think.
Yeah. They're like romance novel genre.
So she's always up for it.
But I think that again comes from having spent so much time with men. I can believe
like,
that.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah.
But she's not like, whoa, yeah, all the time. She's...
No, she doesn't.
She
make
just
that
wants
face.
to do... She does. She will. When she goes back in time, she will. But it's like, it's very much like a thing of, that kind of thing. It's like, oh, that women didn't do that in the 40s. They were prim and proper and all this kind of stuff.
Which is a generalization in the first place.
It's a generalization in the first place, because there were women who did that kind of thing, you know.
But that being said, I do agree with you. She felt a bit too modern.
Like a 90s woman, because that's when the books were written, in the 90s. She was like a 90s woman in the 40s. So you can just imagine her then in the 1700s, what she seems like to them. She's a witch, you know. Yeah, well, she's a witch, yeah, pretty much a witch.
Yeah.
But, you know, of course, like, some characters, all the men kind of find her like, oh, you know, they react to her kind of differently. Some of them are just like, oh, she's a woman. What do you know? She shouldn't be talking to us.
I think it's kind of interesting, because I think in Scotland particularly, women have, and I don't know if it's just my perception being an American, but I feel like women during that time particularly, because there were a lot of wars and things like that going on, and the men were away, so women kind of have to step up. I feel like Scottish women, to me, from that time period, were like stronger. They had more of a voice.
They did, yes, but you've got to remember Claire's English.
Yeah, that's true.
And she speaks and she's a Sassenach.
And
she speaks quite, you know, poshly and like very refined, very gentry. So it's like, you know, it's like they're just going to treat her like, oh, the Sassenach, you know.
Yeah.
She doesn't know what, you know. She's very, ooh, you know.
Yeah.
Which she was in the beginning a little bit. She was a little bit like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like the shock of being thrust into the 1700s and, you know, meeting her husband's ancestor, Black Jack Randall, and, you know, what happened and stuff, and then meeting up with the Jacobites and all that, you know. So
speaking of her husband, in regards to Claire's character development, when she goes back to the 1940s...
From the 1700s,
you know, everything that has happened, and she goes back.
And it's been 3 years in the 40s time.
And her husband accepts everything she has had to say. She's pregnant with this child from another man. you know, he accepts it, and he's like, okay, we're going to stay together. We'll raise the baby together. Fine. She agrees. Okay. I was not happy at all with the way she treated him in those, you know, I think it was last season, was it? Or maybe
the whole, like, when
the beginning
from
of the season.
in the 20 years.
Yeah, in the 20 years that she stayed in her current time period. It's very difficult to talk about because you're, like, talking about the past, but it's the future, and the present time period.
So she went back to the 1940s, and it was like 1948 or something, and she reappeared, and her husband came to get her.
Yeah.
And she told him everything, where she'd been for the past 3 years, and because everybody in the 40s had been telling him she ran off with another man.
Yeah.
You know, there's no signs of a struggle. There's no signs of any kidnapping. It's clear that she just ran off with another fella to wherever.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, hard luck, mate.
Yeah.
You know, the end. But he was like, no, she wouldn't have done that. That's not how she is. And they were just like, yeah, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
She had you fooled. Then she comes back, she tells him everything, and, you know, he's, you know, just accepting of it. Let's raise a baby. But she's itching to get back to her life in the 1700s.
But she does, which she does not believe exists any longer.
Well, she doesn't believe it exists any longer. And I mean, you know,
she believes Jamie to be dead, yeah.
Yeah, he died in Culloden, the Battle of Culloden and everything. That's why she had to go back to the 40s. And that's the end, you know, of that. So she's just basically, she grudgingly gets back into a present day life. They moved to Boston away from the press speculation and everything, because there was like a fervor over how she disappeared and everything, and then she returned. And so he was just like, let's move to Boston and raise Brianna in Boston. I've got a position over there. And she enrolls in medical school to become a doctor.
Yeah.
And of course she meets, you know, resistance there because, you know, they're all like, oh, a woman wants to be...
A woman doctor?
A woman doctor, what's all that about?
Yeah.
You know, even in the progressively American, you know, 1940s, 50s, where everything was years ahead of its time, they were still backward in that kind of thing, you know, and it was the same in Britain too. And of course she becomes a doctor and she's working at a hospital.
Yeah.
1968.
They're living a modern life.
Living basically. A modern life. She goes back to Scotland because...
Well, no. What I was going to say is, all the while, she is totally mistreating, in my opinion, this man who she really loved and could not wait to get back to when she was back in the 1700s, and everything she was doing was for him. She had to make sure that this horrible ancestor of his stayed alive so that he would be born.
Yeah, so his life could be assured.
Because he was such a wonderful man. Okay, well, she gets back then
and it's like, what, Murta, one of the things, like, oh, we have to keep this mythical Frank alive.
Yeah.
You know?
He's a myth to them, of course.
Because it would be 200 years before he was born, you know, 150, whatever.
And so she goes back, and he seems indeed like a wonderful guy. He's willing to raise this child who's not his and treat her like she is his and love her and, you know, spend money on her, put her through college, all of this kind of stuff. And she's just basically horrible to him. They're not having sex at all, I don't think. No. She comes up with this... she came up with it. She came up with this idea of, okay, we'll raise Brianna together.
But we're no longer in love or married or, you know...
We'll lead our separate lives.
Carnal relations have ceased.
Yeah.
You know, and so he eventually finds someone else.
Mm-hmm.
While she's still pining for Jamie, because it kind of started. They started doing it, but it was obviously she had her eyes closed and was thinking of Jamie.
Yeah,
and he kind of knew that, and he was like, "Oh, sod you then."
Yeah,
you know?
He was just like, I
can't do this. Can't do it anymore.
Yeah, because he was in love with her. He missed her, and he worried about her and everything while she was gone. Living her 1700s adventures,
living her 1700s life. You know. So yeah,
I was not into her in that time period at all. I loved her so much when she was in the 1700s, and she went back and was mistreating Frank like that, and I was just like, how dare she?
But if you look at it from her point of view, she she had a lot of she did a lot of growing up in the 1700s, and she did a lot of like, things were like, very fast paced and exciting and adventures. And of course, she met Jamie, who we'll get onto in a minute now, and she married him.
Yeah.
To keep away from the English, and she fell for him, and they were doing it, and and it was just like, and he was this sweet little guy who was he was like,
okay, let's talk
about Jamie. Jamie Fraser. He's one of the Jacobites. He's a warrior. He's in the clan. Clan Mackenzie, I guess, because all that, and they're fighting, and he's kind of like, he agrees to marry her to keep her out of English hands, because there's a law that says you can the English can't take you if you're married to a Scotsman.
If you're Scottish.
If you're Scottish, if you're Scottish. And so she does that, and she ends up falling for Jamie and letting herself get into it,
And Jamie is basically every woman's dream man. And
he's
strong.
He's very much written by a woman. You can tell that. And it's kind of like, if you look at it like that, you can see, oh yeah, this is very much written by a woman.
Strong,
all these men are, actually. You can tell.
But he's sensitive. He's very deep thinking sometimes, but he's also quite innocent sometimes.
He's innocent. He doesn't know what, certain swear words are. And he's like, what's that? He's like, he's got a childlike innocence, but he's also got that, like, strong man protector,
burly.
And I can, like, we were watching, I think it's in season 4, when they're in North Carolina. Oh, no, they're in the Caribbean. And, they've separated and the thing, and he goes, and he sees her in the thing, and she's waving to him from the beach and everything, and he goes, oh, Sassenach, and you're just like, oh, God, this freaking show. This show, she just turned to me, she's like, this show, it's so ridiculously, like,
yes.
like, oh, he saved her, if they met again, it's like all very, like a Hallmark film, like it's all very sweet and sickly in that respect between them. Like I mean, they have arguments and stuff like that, but it's like not like serious arguments. Like he's cheated on her. He's
he's never done anything. He's never
done anything wrong against
her.
Whereas like all the other male characters, they're all buggers. And, like Dougal Mackenzie, is the ultimate male.
That being said, I don't think there's been a lot of character development with Jamie. He's stayed pretty much the same type of person the whole time.
Very accepting. He can be a bit of a bugger sometimes, loses his temper, smashes someone up, and and it's just like, oh, what did you do that for, Jamie, you big brute, you silly boy.
Something I don't want to say I don't like, because that's a bit strong, but it is a little bit like requires a suspension of disbelief, in that he's so accepting of her stories about being from the future, and
all of it is. I mean, most of them.
He's not freaked out at all about it, really. He's just like, oh, that's very interesting. Tell me more about what's going to happen in the future.
Which could be because because people have theorized, oh, he might be a time traveler too. He might be from the past, the past, pre-1700s, medieval times, if you want to call it that, which, like...
I don't think so.
But I don't think so, yeah.
He seems of his time.
He seems of his time, yeah, but I mean, then again, it's like nothing really progressed in the Highlands as much,
True. I think let's move on from him. We're running short on time. Let's just talk about Brianna and Roger, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll make another episode talking about some of the more minor characters.
Brianna and Roger, they were introduced. Brianna's Jamie and Claire's daughter.
They're all connected.
They're all connected, yeah. He's Dougal Mackenzie. Roger Mackenzie is Dougal Mackenzie and Galis Duncan's child.
Well, descendant.
Child.
Oh, no, he is their... Oh, no, he's not their child.
He's not their child. He's their descendant, yeah.
Time travel.
Yeah, time travel, yeah. He's their descendant.
Right.
And Galis was a time traveler, a fellow time traveler. She went through the stones in the 60s. She's kind of tied it up pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
So, and the show does a good job of showing that, too.
Roger was raised by a vicar.
A reverend,
A reverend who was friends with
Frank and Claire.
Randall, yeah. So the people that Frank and Claire were staying with in Scotland was this reverend who was raising, I think it was his nephew, which was Roger.
The Reverend Wakefield,
yes.
Because he was called Roger Wakefield. He was called because he was raised as him because he never knew his dad. And I'm sure we'll get to that as time goes on.
Possibly, yeah.
You know, as to why Roger didn't know his dad and,
Maybe,
you know,
yeah.
his dad left early on or whatever. Killed in the war.
I'm assuming his dad was killed in the war.
Killed in the war, maybe, yeah. I think they might have actually said something about that, but there's quite a lot to take in this. Brianna, though, she was
raised by Claire and Frank. Yeah.
So and then she found out, and, you know, she thought her mother was going crazy when they went back to Scotland, and they were just like, oh, yeah, you're not Frank's actual daughter, you're Jamie's daughter from the past, and he lived in the 200s. She was just like, well, you're just going crazy.
Yeah,
you know?
why are you making out this ridiculous
story?
Yeah.
Because she thought, oh, you just came back here to see this guy. You know, you love this guy. Mm-hmm. Because Frank and her were going to get a divorce before Frank was killed in a car crash, and I feel like she had to kill Frank off because he was dying a slow death there, you know. It's like she's like, oh yeah, you know, I can see what she did there, you know, and she was writing the whole thing. She's like, I can't have him go with someone else and just kind of like be somewhere else. I have to kill him, you know.
Yeah,
because, you know, put him out of his misery. So
the show starts to focus on Brianna, who is Claire and Jamie's daughter. For a while, it seems like it's going to focus on them more so than Claire and Jamie, and I was not into it at all. I'm not interested in Brianna, or I wasn't at
It's
first.
kind of like the Paul Dark novels where, you know, he starts off with Ross and Demelza, then he starts focusing on their children, you know, their descendants.
I think my problem with Brianna and Roger was just that it was set in the 60s, and I was not
getting it.
I wasn't interested in the 60s. I wanted to go back to 1700s Scotland, you know. It was just
which they do. You know, Brianna decides, you know what, you know, because her and Roger had this kind of like disagreement. He wanted to marry Brianna, and she was like, hold on there, boy. Yeah. You know, I'm not into that, you know. I'm a young girl. Let's just take this one step at a time, you know. But he's very old-fashioned in that respect.
So he wanted to have sex.
I want to marry you, and then we'll do it. Yeah. You know, and she didn't want to kind of do that.
She was like, oh, we can just do it, you know. We don't have to get married. And he was like, oh, God, no.
And they portray Roger as like, you know, I've kind of never liked Roger.
So the whole reason for this podcast is because we were watching a YouTuber talking about how much he disliked Roger. Yeah. And Dominic and I were agreeing.
Roger, that she's painted him as like the anti-Jamie. And not in like a bad boy rogue way, in like he's so wimpy.
He's very weak and
wimpy, and you know, it's kind of like this. You know, he's like, oh.
No, you said when we were watching one episode, he's the modern man, isn't he?
He's the modern man. Yeah, he's like, he's sensitive.
But not in the same way that Jamie's sensitive, because Jamie can be quite sensitive.
He can be sensitive, but he hasn't got like that fight or flight spirit. And that showed when he went back to the 1700s, you know, looking for Brianna who'd gone. Yeah. It was kind of just like, oh God, you know, he's gonna get freaking eaten alive. And he and in some respects he did. Yeah. But it didn't change him. I thought, oh well, you know, he's been taken captive by the Mohawks. This is gonna toughen him up, but he's still just talking, and that's kind of like the point. He was an Oxford University professor. He's never going to be like, and even Claire said this is not his life. He needs to go back to the...
Yeah.
He can't survive here, but somehow he's managed to survive.
Because they went back to the 1700s. Brianna went back to warn her mother and father of an obituary that she found in present-day 1960s that Claire and Jamie were going to die in a fire. So that's why she went back to the 1700s, and Roger went back chasing after her. Well, when Brianna got there... aside from the fact that she was raped,
she raped by Stephen Bonnet.
She seemed to quite like the 1700s.
She liked it. Yeah, she was like, oh yeah,
She was with her mom and dad.
Everything was cool.
Yeah, she
Everyone
met other
was
family
great.
that she had.
And it was like, oh yeah, I wasn't really thinking. But Roger's time is very much the 20th century. Yeah, and
he feels very, very fish out of water.
Yeah, very, very fish out of water there. And it's kind of like, yeah, he would not have survived this long.
Oh no!
In reality, he would have been hung.
Yeah, yeah.
He would have been hung. He would have been stabbed. He would have been killed by the Native Americans that he found in North Carolina, who took him prisoner. It's like he would not have been able to, he's not. Even though he's a Oxford history professor, he's not smart enough to kind of outfox people, even if he is from the future. You
thought that his PTSD from having been hung in last week's episode was because he was feeling like, oh well, I should have just died.
Yeah.
And I think I might agree with that. Maybe he is. I agree with it in the way that he definitely knows he does not belong in this time period. I mean, Jamie doesn't trust him to get things done for the family on his own, really, and he knows that.
Yeah.
And it's all just awkward, yeah. But now they've got a child together. They don't know if the child can get back through the stones with them.
Yeah.
So it's just like, ugh, do we have to stay here? But yeah, I'm really kind of just like, he can just go, really.
Just go, Roger. Just go. Just get out of here. Send him home. Send the man back to the 60s.
As much as I've never really warmed to him. I don't know.
And it's just, it's not the actor either. Richard Rankin, who plays him, he's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all really good actors at this, like Sophie Skelton, who plays Brianna, and Sam Heughan, who plays Jamie. They're all brilliant at this.
Yeah.
But the character of Roger, yeah, I'd like to see who likes him. Who's like, we've met Jamie, we've met Murtaugh, who was played by Duncan LaCroix, we've met Dougal Mackenzie even.
Yeah.
Even Frank and Jack Randall, they've all been kind of strong kind of male characters.
Yeah.
And then we've got this guy coming in going, oh, don't know.
Is that a comment on modern society?
Maybe.
Though,
it's like, it's like, oh, these men are wimpy now. Are we wimpy now? Are we wienerish? What's going on?
Wiener. That's what I keep calling him. He's such a wiener. He's just a wiener.
Anyway, we're going to wrap this up now, and we're going to come back with a part 2, because we want to keep talking about this.
We're going to have to. Yeah. I won't even add anything. I was just going to say,
we can talk more about Roger in part 2.
I wasn't really getting into Brianna in the 60s, but I like her with her mom and dad in the 1700s. That being said, I don't really care if she goes also. I feel...
She can go home too. Send him home with her.
I do feel a little bit bad. I feel bad for Claire and Jamie that they've now got this grandchild that they won't get to see if it goes back to the 60s, what I mean?
Yeah, they'll be long dead.
Yeah.
Fire or not,
Yeah. I think there's another episode here, you guys, unfortunately, because I really wanted to talk about why some people can go through the rocks and why some people can't. We could
make this on an ultra long episode, but
I think we shouldn't. Yeah,
we shouldn't.
We shouldn't, and we should probably
30 minutes is all you can stand hearing of us anyway.
And we should probably space out the Outlander content because I know there's people out there that are just like
don't know about this Outlander. And I don't care either.
If it sounds
Talk more about tea and sandwiches.
If it sounds interesting at all, though, you should definitely check the show out because it's a lot of fun. There's just there's so much to it. I mean,
there's a lot to it, as we'll get to in part 2.
Family trees and histories and time travel and just Scotland and
If you've enjoyed this content, please consider supporting us on Patreon.
Yes.
And a big thank you to all those who do already.
Oh my gosh, yes, definitely. We so appreciate you guys, especially through this time. I mean, you guys are what's making it possible for us to continue to record these podcasts. So, yeah, big shout out, huge thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I think that's it for today.
That's it for part 1.
Let's go take a nap.
Or perhaps watch more Outlander.
Bye.
Bye!